Lucy Clews was 39 years old, a woman with beautiful golden hair who lived quietly in a bungalow on Bath Road in West Chadsmoor, Cannock, Staffordshire. To her neighbours, she was someone who kept herself to herself, a nice woman who had shared her modest home with her husband Stephen for about 4 years. To her family, Lucy was everything. Her mother Linda said she was the light of her life. Lucy called her several times every single day without fail. Even during her worst struggles, Linda could count on those regular phone calls from her daughter. Lucy also shared a special bond with her grandmother Elizabeth, and had siblings who cared deeply about her well-being. But Lucy was fighting battles that most people couldn't see. She had struggled with drug addiction for many years, demons that had made her life increasingly difficult to manage. Despite this, she maintained those close family relationships, especially with her mother. To those who loved her, she was irreplaceable. She was their beautiful golden-haired baby girl, as her family would later describe her. December 2021 would shatter Lucy's world completely. On December 3rd, just 3 weeks before Christmas, she found her 65-years-old husband Stephen slumped on their bed, unresponsive. In her panic, she poured water on his head, trying anything to wake him. When she realised he was in cardiac arrest, she called an ambulance, but it was too late. Stephen died that day from what an inquest would later determine was a drug overdose. For Lucy, losing Stephen wasn't just about grief. He had been her anchor in a chaotic world, the person who understood her struggles and loved her despite them. In the days that followed his death, she isolated herself from visitors, unable to cope with the overwhelming reality of her loss. Her health began to deteriorate rapidly. She was diagnosed with pneumonia and hospitalized, but even serious illness couldn't keep her away from what she knew she had to do. On December 21st, 2021, Lucy discharged herself from hospital against medical advice. She had to attend Stephen's funeral. Standing at that graveside just 4 days before Christmas, Lucy was burying the love of her life while battling pneumonia and processing grief that threatened to overwhelm her. Judge Christina Montgomery KC would later describe her as recently widowed, grieving the loss of her husband, who she had only buried some few days before her death. Lucy returned to her empty bungalow after the funeral, facing the prospect of her first Christmas alone. The house that had once been filled with love now echoed with loneliness. Stephen's belongings were everywhere, constant reminders of what she had lost, the bed where she had found him dying, the rooms they had shared. Everything hurt. Despite her isolation, despite her grief, despite her pneumonia, Lucy's addiction still called to her. December 24th, 2021, Christmas Eve. While families across Staffordshire were preparing for the holidays, 2 very different stories were unfolding that would collide with devastating consequences. At HMP Dovegate, 26-year-old Thomas Grant was walking free. He had been released on licence, halfway through a sentence for shoplifting. Grant was a man defined by his addiction, someone for whom drugs mattered more than everything else. Despite having nowhere to go, he had refused help offered by Staffordshire Police's integrated management team. He wasn't interested in accommodation or support services. As investigators would later note, he was focused on getting his hands on drugs and had no interest in what was being offered. That same day, Lucy Clews made a decision that would cost her everything. Despite her illness, grief, and having buried her husband just 3 days earlier, she left her bungalow and travelled to a flat in Hednesford. It was described in court as a drugs den, the home of a mutual acquaintance where people gathered to buy and use illegal substances. It was there that Lucy's path crossed with Thomas Grant's. To understand the tragedy of what followed, you need to understand what these 2 people represented. Lucy was a woman drowning in grief, seeking escape from pain through substances, but still capable of compassion and kindness. Grant was a predator, whose only concern was feeding his addiction, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The people at the flat that day decided to make a trip together. They would travel by train to Hampstead and Birmingham to purchase drugs from a dealer known as Sonny. £250 worth of drugs. But during this journey, Grant told Lucy something that would trigger her fatal compassion. He explained that he had just been released from prison and had nowhere to stay. He painted himself as someone in need, someone who required help during the Christmas period. Here was Lucy Clews, a woman who had just buried her husband, battling serious illness, struggling with her own demons, and she was being asked to help a stranger who claimed to have nothing. The normal response might have been to focus on her own overwhelming problems, but Lucy wasn't normal in that way. Even in her darkest hour, she was still capable of thinking about someone else's suffering. She made an offer that came straight from her heart. Thomas Grant could stay with her over the Christmas period. She wanted company during what she knew would be the most difficult Christmas of her life, and she thought she was offering the same comfort to someone else who needed it. Grant accepted immediately. Here was somewhere to stay, somewhere warm and safe, while he focused on his next hit. For Lucy, this was about human connection during unbearable loneliness. For Grant, she was simply useful. They returned to Bath Road together, to the bungalow Lucy had shared with Stephen. She welcomed Grant into her home. She offered him food, shelter, and companionship. She treated him as a guest, as someone deserving of kindness. What Lucy didn't know was that she had just invited her killer into her home. Thomas Grant had no interest in providing comfort to a grieving widow. He saw only opportunity, a place to stay, belongings to steal, and a vulnerable woman to exploit. Christmas Eve passed quietly in the bungalow on Bath Road. Lucy probably felt some relief at not being completely alone during this first Christmas without Stephen. Grant was plotting. Christmas Day 2021 began peacefully at Lucy's bungalow. Despite everything she was going through, Lucy's family hadn't forgotten about her. Her sister-in-law arrived that morning, bringing Christmas lunch and checking on Lucy during what everyone knew would be a particularly difficult day. The visit was a bright spot for Lucy. Here was family love and support when she needed it most. During the visit, Thomas Grant was present in the house. To the sister-in-law, he was just someone Lucy was helping, an act of Christmas charity that seemed entirely in character. When she left that afternoon, Lucy was alone with that man. What happened next was an act of unimaginable brutality. At some point after the sister-in-law departed, Grant turned on the woman who had shown him nothing but kindness. He stabbed Lucy multiple times, inflicting wound after wound on someone who had done nothing but offer him shelter during Christmas. But the stabbing wasn't enough for Grant. He then strangled Lucy, making sure there would be no chance of survival, no possibility that she might identify her attacker or call for help. When it was over, Lucy lay dead or dying at the foot of her bed, in the bedroom she had shared with Stephen. The irony was devastating. The room where Lucy had tried desperately to save her husband's life just 3 weeks earlier had now become the scene of her own murder. CCTV cameras captured Thomas Grant leaving the scene on Christmas Day. But rather than flee the area entirely, he made a decision that revealed the true depth of his callousness. He chose to use Lucy's home as his base of operations, staying in the house where her body lay cooling, treating it as his personal headquarters while he focused on feeding his addiction. He began systematically looting Lucy's most precious possessions. Her wedding ring, the symbol of her marriage to Stephen, became nothing more than a commodity. He also took 2 necklaces, one of which had belonged to Stephen himself. Even Lucy's mobile phone was stolen. All of it was turned into drug money while Lucy's body lay murdered in her bedroom. Over the following days, Grant used Lucy's home as his base while he hawked her possessions around Hednesford and the surrounding areas. He visited people he knew, desperately trying to convert Lucy's treasures into cash for his next fix. The wedding ring that had symbolised a love that death couldn't break was sold to fund the addiction of the man who had murdered its owner. Meanwhile, Linda Clews was growing increasingly worried. Her daughter, who called several times every day without fail, had gone completely silent. By December 29th, Linda knew something was desperately wrong. It was just past midnight when Staffordshire Police arrived at the bungalow on Bath Road. The call had come from a worried mother who hadn't heard from her daughter in days. Linda Clews knew something was terribly wrong. Her daughter Lucy called her several times every single day without fail. The silence was deafening. When officers entered the modest home in West Chadsmoor, Cannock, they found 39-year-old Lucy Clews lying dead on her bedroom floor. She was at the foot of her bed, her body telling a story of unimaginable violence. Multiple stab wounds, evidence of strangulation. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong or a domestic dispute. This was brutal, calculated murder. Detective Chief Inspector Cheryl Hannon of Staffordshire Police's Major and Organised Crime Department had seen countless crime scenes, but this one was particularly disturbing. The victim was clearly vulnerable. The house showed signs that someone had been living there recently, someone who didn't belong, and scattered throughout the property were possessions that didn't match the victim's profile. As forensic officers processed the scene, a clearer picture began to emerge. Lucy's most precious belongings were missing. But this wasn't a burglary. The theft was too specific, too personal. The breakthrough came when investigators found a knife at the scene. When sent for forensic testing, it would reveal both Lucy's DNA and that of her killer. Grant's possessions were scattered throughout Lucy's home, confirming that he had been staying there. CCTV footage showed Grant leaving Lucy's house on Christmas Day. His attempts to sell her belongings created a clear trail leading back to him. The evidence was overwhelming, but Grant was nowhere to be found. The search didn't last long. On December 30th, 2021, officers spotted Grant outside a Tesco store in Hednesford. He was wearing a COVID mask, perhaps hoping it would help him avoid recognition. When police approached and asked for his name, Grant immediately began lying, giving officers a false identity. When they asked if he had any tattoos, he said no. But when officers requested that he roll up his sleeves, the deception crumbled. He was forced to admit he had a tattoo on his arm. The arrest was captured on police body-worn cameras, footage that would later be released to the public. When officers told Grant he was under arrest on suspicion of murder, his reaction was pure theatre.
Murder? Murder? Are you joking? Murder? Cookie.
Grant was initially released under investigation while police built their case. For 5 months, he remained free while forensic evidence was processed and investigators followed up on leads. It wasn't until May 30th, 2022, that he was formally charged with murder. While awaiting trial, Grant made admissions about the murder to prison officers. According to DCO the I, Cheryl Hannon, Grant had denied killing Lucy during police interviews, but later admitted he had done so when he became angry with officers while on remand. These admissions would prove crucial, though Grant would later claim that officers had lied about what he said. The first trial at Stafford Crown Court began in November 2022, but after 19 days, the jury was discharged and a retrial was ordered. The second trial in 2023 lasted 5 weeks. Grant maintained his innocence, claiming someone else was responsible, but refusing to identify this mysterious killer. The evidence was overwhelming. His DNA on the murder weapon, CCTV footage, his possessions in Lucy's home, and his admissions to prison officers. On August 8th, 2023, the jury returned their verdict, guilty of murder. But Grant had one final insult to deliver. He refused to leave his prison cell for sentencing, declining to face justice. Judge Christina Montgomery KC sentenced him in absentia to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years and 152 days. Lucy's family said, "We cannot express in words the hurt we feel in losing Lucy. The sorrow and pain will never go away, but it is some comfort to us to know that justice has been served." Her mother Linda added, "I will always love Lucy, my daughter, and my memories of her will live on." Her grandmother Elizabeth said simply, "I love her and will always love her, forever and always." Thomas Grant remains imprisoned until 2049. But this story isn't about his punishment. It's about Lucy Clews, whose final act was Christmas kindness.